Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the first installment of our Data in Motion series, Building Resilient Pipelines for Hybrid and Multi-Cloud Architectures. Our speakers today are Carlos Arias, one of our Senior Directors of Product Management at Precisely, as well as Britney Schultz, one of our Product Marketing Managers. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Carlos and Britney. So, hey, Carlos, really great to talk to you today about hybrid and multi-cloud environments. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Brittany. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be talking about this topic today.
Yeah, I feel like it's something that's becoming more and more prevalent in, the data integration market and landscape. So I think it would be important to kind of set the stage and take a step back before we really dive into the nitty-gritty of it. So when we're talking about hybrid and multi-cloud being the new normal, what does that actually look like for most customers today? Do you feel like organizations are choosing this deliberately, or sort of inheriting it through methods of like growth, acquisitions, or just having legacy systems in general?
That's a great question. I believe it's mostly inherited, and that's what makes it so challenging. In my
Mhm.
conversations with customers, particularly in financial services and healthcare, very few woke up one day and said, let's deliberately build a hybrid multi-cloud architecture. What actually happened is much more organic and frankly very messy. Here is the typical pattern. So you have a mission critical system on mainframe, for instance, DB2 for, IBMC, IMS, vSAN files that have been running, for decades. Then the business pushes for cloud transformation. So new applications land in AWS or Azure. And then meanwhile, your SaaS providers are running on their own infrastructure. And if you have acquired another company, you are suddenly managing their Snowflake environment alongside your legacy data warehouse. The result of all this, you've got this patchwork of environments that all need to talk to each other. And the data doesn't care where it lives. The business needs its flowing between all these systems in real time to serve customers, meet compliance requirements, and drive operations. So what I'm seeing is a shift in mindset. Organizations are moving from how do we consolidate everything to more an accepting stage, which is like how do we orchestrate across everything that we have, that's the new normal. And accepting this hybrid reality and building integration strategies that work with it and not
Mhm.
against it is probably the new goal.
Yeah, and I think that that's really important, especially when you consider the fact that sometimes organizations can have tens, if not hundreds, of different tools, all with their own UI and UX and different data formats, and they all do different things. Like being able to share data between all those different systems is probably really complicated. So, what would you say is like the biggest technical challenge that teams face when they're trying to move and integrate that data across these different environments that exist on-prem, that exist in cloud, or that exist in SaaS environments?
I think the challenges fall into three main buckets, and they're all kind of interconnected. The first one I would say is connectivity and compatibility. So
Mhm.
when you are dealing with legacy mainframe systems, you can't just spin up a REST API. We're talking about vSAN files, IMS databases, systems that were built before the internet existed. So getting real-time change data from these environments to modern
Yeah.
cloud platforms requires specialized connectors and deep understanding of how these systems actually work. That's what Precisely is good about. And then you layer on the complexity of different cloud providers, having their own networking models, security boundaries, data formats. Beyond just establishing connections, the real challenge is keeping this data synchronized and consistent across these different cloud silos. So you
Mhm.
really need sophisticated orchestration and continuous monitoring to ensure the data stays timely and accurate and it moves between these environments. Otherwise, you end up with data that drifts and where different systems have conflicting versions of the truth. I would say data consistency and latency. So in traditional ETL, you could batch data overnight and accept some staleness. But when you're running real-time fraud detection or powering customer-facing applications, you need change data capture to deliver updates in
Mhm.
milliseconds, not hours. So the technical challenge is maintaining transactional consistency while this data is moving across, very different systems with different performance characteristics. So a mainframe can handle enormous transaction volumes, but can your cloud target keep up?
Yeah.
What happens when there is network latency between environments? And here is what makes it even harder. Each platform has its own way of doing things. AWS, for instance, has one set of tools and APIs. Azure has another. Google Cloud has another one, has it on. So trying to create a unified management approach across this ecosystem or landscape is very difficult.
Yeah.
I would
I
Go
oh,
ahead, go ahead.
no, and I feel like that can be really difficult, especially because again, that real-time data aspect and what happens if the pipeline breaks. I mean, like from a product perspective, what do you think it means for a data pipeline to be really resilient when it comes to these kind of environments? And how do you design for possible failure when you've got data moving across all of these different environments and into so many different systems?
Resilience in hybrid environments is about assuming failure. Failure is going to happen and designing for this graceful degradation rather than hoping that everything is going to stay up. So at the pipeline level, this means several things. First, automatic recovery mechanisms. So if a target system goes down, say your cloud data warehouse is temporarily unavailable, the pipeline needs to buffer changes, maintain ordering, and automatically resume when the target comes back online. You can lose transactions or create data inconsistencies.
Yeah.
Second, is monitoring and observability across the entire path. So it's not enough to know that data left the source. You need visibility into whether it reached intermediate systems, how it was transformed, and whether it landed correctly at the destination. When something breaks, and it will for sure, teams need to pinpoint exactly where in the multi-hop journey the failure occurred. And I would say lastly, the third, and this is critical, is avoiding vendor locking that reduces this resiliency. If your entire data integration strategy is tied to a single cloud provider, or their proprietary tools, what happens when you need to integrate with a different cloud or move workloads? We're seeing customers today specifically choose solutions that give them consistent capabilities, but across environments. The same CDC technology that works with their mainframe also needs to work for like cloud databases. From
Yeah.
a design philosophy, we think about resilience as design for a second failure. It's almost like how they design planes today. First failure is going to happen. What do you do when you have a cascade of these failures
Yeah.
happening?
And you know what? It probably makes sense for organizations to walk into something like this with a plan, because if you don't have a plan, that can result in things like unplanned downtime, upset customers, lots of other things that organizations probably don't want to be dealing with. So planning for failure, I think, is a really good way to think about that. Kind of pivoting to another topic, though, we see that many teams are worried about adding things like governance could slow their innovation when it comes to data integration. So, how are organizations successfully balancing things like agility with control when it comes to their hybrid and multi-cloud integrations?
Yeah, this is one of the most common tensions I see, and the successful organizations are those who have stopped treating governance as a gate and start treating it more as a guardrail. Here's what I mean by this distinction. A gate is something that you have to get approval to pass through. Every pipeline, every data movement requires someone to review it, sign off, create documentation. That absolutely kills agility. A guardrail, on the other hand, is something that keeps you safe while you move fast. It's automated, embedded in the platform, and doesn't require manual intervention for every decision.
Yeah.
The practical implementation looks almost like this. Instead of requiring an approval for every new data pipeline, you establish a policy-based automation. For example,
Mm.
any data containing like PII mass, data must be encrypted before leaving the on-prem environment becomes an enforceable rule for the platform automatically. This we have an example actually that is of a customer asking exactly for this. Similarly, successful teams implement self-service with boundaries, so they give data engineers the ability to configure and deploy pipelines themselves, but within pre-approved patterns, right? So you can spin up your CDC pipeline from mainframe to cloud, but you're choosing from certified connectors, using pre-configured network paths, etc. The agility comes from not from waiting for approvals. The governance comes from controlling the boundaries of what's possible.
Mm.
So the other pattern I'm seeing is embedded lineage and metadata management. So
Yeah.
rather than treating documentation as a separate step that slows things down, this is very typical in all organizations, the integration platform automatically captures lineage, dependencies, and transformation. So this means you get governance visibility without governance overhead. You know
Oh,
where the data came from and where it's going, but the engineer doesn't have to spend hours documenting it manually. Nobody enjoys doing that, honestly.
Yeah. So with all of these advances, when you think about the way that governance is changing, how has the role of it changed now that data pipelines can span multiple clouds and platforms, especially when you think about the fact that now you can do this more boundary focused compliance, and now that the data is actually in the hands of more of the users as opposed to being bottlenecked,
Yeah.
by those data stewards.
Yeah, that's a good question. So governance has to become both more technical and more strategic at the same time.
Yeah.
On the technical side, I would say you can no longer govern just by controlling access to a centralized data warehouse. Data is moving in real time across cloud boundaries between systems through transformation layers, traditional data addressed. Governance doesn't cover this anymore. So you need data in motion governance, policies that apply to stream data, transformations that happen mid-flight, and the ability to
Yeah.
enforce controls at multiple points in the pipeline. So this is particularly critical in regulated industries. A bank can just stream customer data from their mainframe to AWS without proper controls, even if it's in their own AWS account. So they need to ensure encryption in transit, validate that only authorized services can access certain data types, and maintain audit trails, of where data move and why. This
Yeah.
is this has to happen at the pipeline level and not just at the storage endpoints. Strategically, governance is shifting from like an IT own to a business own. So the
Mhm.
questions aren't just, is the data secure, but should this data be used for this purpose? And
Yeah.
that requires an understanding data in context, what it represents, where it came from, how it's been transformed, and what policies apply to it. So in a hybrid environment, this context can get lost as data moves between systems. Lastly, the response I'm seeing from leading organization is implementing federated governance models. So rather than trying to centralize all governance in one team or tool, they establish governance standards and then push enforcement down to individual platforms and pipelines. So each cloud environment enforces the same policies, but in a way that's native to that platform. And this requires, a strong metadata management and the ability to propagate governance rules across different systems. The role of governance in general, I say, has evolved from like a gatekeeper to enabler, and it's about providing these frameworks to make safe data movements possible at scale rather than
Yeah.
manually.
And it probably makes the data stewards a little bit more popular because they're not like knocking down people's doors saying, "Oh, you're not doing this right." And
That's
now it's just
exactly
like,
right.
"Hey, here's the opportunity of how you can do this." And then I think about like, just going back to what you were saying about being able to audit things and understanding the lineage, like when you think about how organizations have to deal with things like compliance and regulations and things like that, it's really important for them to be able to understand all of the data across all of their systems. And if you can't do that, you are in really big trouble and probably have to face like monetary penalties and stuff like that. So,
Exactly
not
right.
good. Yeah, having governance is really important. But kind of going along with that, how do you feel like modern IT environments are forcing organizations to think their just overall data integration strategy compared to even what it looked like a couple of years ago?
So I would say the fundamental shift is from integrate data to integrate data continuously. And that
Mhm.
sounds subtle, but it changes everything about how you approach this strategy. So even 3 years ago, many organizations were thinking about data integration as patch, oriented ETL, extract overnight, transform in a
Yeah.
staging area, load to a warehouse. The strategy was about efficiency and consolidation, but now with hybrid and multi-cloud environments, the expectations have completely changed.
Yeah.
So businesses need real-time insights, applications need live data, to function, and customers expect immediate responses.
Mhm.
And this forces a rethink of architecture. So you can't just move data from point A to point B anymore. You need pipelines that support these multi-consumption patterns simultaneously. The
Yeah.
same data stream from your mainframe might need to feed a real-time fraud detection service, land in a data lake for analytics, sync to a cloud database for applications, and publish events to Kafka for event-driven architectures. So your integration strategy has to account for all this at once.
Yeah.
The other major shift is around platform consolidation versus best of breed. So a few years ago, the trend was toward consolidation platforms, one vendor to do everything. But hybrid and multi-cloud reality has shown that that doesn't work. You've got different teams using different tools, different clouds, different, with native services, different use cases requiring specialized capabilities. So the new strategy is about finding solutions that provide consistency without lock-in. So
Mm,
how do you give teams familiar capabilities across different environments while still letting them use the best tool for a specific job? You know. So the
yeah.
strategic question isn't like cloud or on-prem anymore. Is how do we orchestrate data flows across all our environments in a way that's resilient, governed, and supports the speed of the business?
Yeah, and I guess something that really gets gets data into the hands of the users quickly, and allows them to really use it as an asset as opposed to maybe having that be a bottleneck, having to wait for that data, you know. So when it comes to organizations that may be early in their modernization journey, where should they start so that they can avoid creating more complexity for themselves? What do you think are some easy wins that companies can focus on?
So one I can think of is start with data visibility even before data movement. And this
Yeah.
is the easiest mistake to avoid and the highest value wing for your teams. So here's what happens. Organizations get excited about cloud migration, they start moving data, and 6 months later they have data scattered across multiple environments with no clear understanding of what's where, who owns it, or how it's being used. So they have traded mainframe complexity for cloud chaos, basically. The first step, should be establishing a data catalog and lineage tracking for your existing critical data flows. So before you even move anything, understand what you have, where it's coming from, where it's going, and who depends on it. This doesn't require ripping and replacing system. It's all about creating this visibility that I mentioned. So the quick win here is identifying your top 10 most critical data flows and documenting them thoroughly. For most organizations, these are the data pipelines that directly impact revenue or compliance. So once you understand these flows, you can modernize them strategically rather than reactively. Second easy win, I would say, is implement CDC on high value data sources. So don't try to migrate entire systems. Pick one critical database. Maybe it's customer data on mainframe. Maybe it's transaction data in an on-prem Oracle database, and set up real-time change data capture to a cloud target. So this gives you cloud access to critical data without disrupting production systems. It's low risk, high value, and teaches your teams, the patterns they need for broader modernization. Third, I would say, and this prevents enormous complexity later, establish integration standards early. So
Yeah.
define how data will be moved between environments, what security controls apply, how metadata will be managed. It's tempting to let every team choose their own integration tools, but that creates technical debt, that is very painful to unwind later on. And you don't need to be rigid, but having standard patterns for common scenarios like, here is how we do CDC from mainframe to cloud, or here's our approved method for SaaS integration, prevents this fragmentation. So I would say the anti-pattern I see all the time is organizations trying to modernize everything at once and picking the most complex systems to start with. I would say start small, prove value, build expertise, then scale. And whatever you do, don't move data without understanding why you are moving it, what are you going to do with it, and, things like that.
Yeah, and document everything, right? So
Yes.
important to make sure that we have a record of what everything is and where it's going and how it's connected to all of the other systems. Um, it looks like we have time for one more question. So, looking forward into 2026, right? That's what we're doing here, looking at trends in 2026. What's one mindset shift or capability that data teams must adopt so that they can succeed in this hybrid and multi-cloud, integration world?
I would say the critical mindset shift is moving from data integration to data ecosystem orchestration. And
Mm,
here is what I mean. Traditional data integration is about connecting point A to point B, so moving data from this database to that warehouse. But in a hybrid and multi-cloud environment, you're not dealing with simple point-to-point connections anymore. You're managing complex data flows that span multiple systems with different consumption patterns, different latency requirements, different governance rules. So the teams that will succeed in 2026 and beyond are those who think about data integration as orchestrating an ecosystem. And
mm,
this means understanding not just how do we move this data, but how does this data flow participate in the larger data architecture? How does this pipeline interact with other pipelines? What downstream dependencies exist? What happens when requirements change? The capability that enables this is unified orchestration and observability. So you need to be able to see all your data flows, regardless of whether they're running on-prem, AWS, Azure, from some systems in one place. So you need to understand dependencies, monitor health, track lineage, and enforce policies consistently. And without this unified view, you're flying blind, basically. This
Yeah.
also means that adopting API first and event-driven architectures for integration is key. So data shouldn't just flow on a schedule, schedules or rigid pipelines. Systems should be able to request data when they need it, react to events as they happen, and compose data from multiple sources dynamically. And this requires thinking about data integration infrastructure as a service layer that other systems consume rather than a custom-built pipeline. The final piece I would say is embracing automation and AI for integration management. And as the complexity grows, you can't manually configure every pipeline, troubleshoot every failure, or optimize every data flow. So teams need capabilities like auto-scaling based on data volumes, intelligent routing based on data characteristics, automated anomaly detection for data quality, or AI-assisted troubleshooting. If I had to summarize it, I would say stop thinking about moving data between systems, start thinking about building a nervous system of, for your data ecosystem that you can sense, react, adapt to changing business needs across all your environments.
Yeah. I guess it's about being adaptable today because so many things are changing. You need to be able to have a process that is repeatable and scalable, but something that also is forward looking. Um,
That's right.
wow. Well, awesome. I feel like we got a lot of really good information here. So thank you so much, Carlos. Really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me this afternoon, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Britney. I love the conversation and I'll be here for next. Take care.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you so much to our speakers for diving deeper into building resilient pipelines for hybrid and multi-cloud architectures. If you're interested in seeing more conversations like this one, you can check out the next installment in our series, Building Trusted Data Pipelines. And if you would like to go deeper into the topic of integration and data in motion, hop on over to precisely.com to see more demos, white papers, and case studies. If you're interested in a conversation with some of our Precisely experts around this topic, you can go to precisely.com/contact for a personalized demo. Thank you again so much for joining this session and have a great rest of your day.